Hi, everyone. Welcome back to It Happened in Hollywood. I'm your host, Seth Abramovich, senior writer at The Hollywood Reporter. This week, we're going to be revisiting the movie that turned Winona Ryder into a major Hollywood star. All that and more on It Happened in Hollywood. So I don't know what generation you assign yourself to, but I am firmly in the Gen X zone, and proudly so. I like being a Gen Xer, and if I was to describe what Gen X is, and I see it debated a lot on social media, but I would say two things. We were slackers and we were nihilists. The less you cared, the better, and the darker your outlook, the better you fit in. And this movie, I think, really kind of encapsulated and launched the whole Gen X ethos for my generation. It came out in 1989, and I was a teen living in Montreal, and I went to go see this at my local art house, trying to be cool, and my mind was kind of blown. I had no idea, having been raised on kind of John Hughes teen comedies, which I love. Make no mistake, they're amazing films, but suddenly it flipped the entire paradigm on its head, and this movie was pretty much as dark as it comes. It had teen suicide, it had murders, it had Mean Girls type politics, and it really turned the whole high school playground into more of a battleground. And that movie is Heathers. It, of course, would go on to launch Winona Ryder, who made it right after she did Beetlejuice. So the pairing of those two films really shot her into the stratosphere. And she became sort of the poster girl for the whole Gen X generation. And, in films like Reality Bites. But Heathers was her launching pad, and isn't she great in it? The film was written by a guy named Daniel Waters. He was born in Ohio, but he actually went to my alma mater in Montreal and lived in Montreal for a while, and then moved to L.A. and did the Tarantino thing and worked at a video store. And while he was there, he wrote this opus. It was a 3-hour script, and he thought Kubrick was going to direct it. That was the only director he envisioned. Of course, things got a little more realistic. He whittled it down to under 2 hours. And in the end, a young director named Michael Lehmann was the one who boarded the project and saw it to fruition. And what a great job he did. So Michael is our guest today, and he can tell us a lot more about how Heathers, starring Winona Ryder, and which also launched the career of Christian Slater, came to be. Welcome, Michael Lehmann. It's a real honor to meet you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Was this your first feature film?
Absolutely my first feature film. I was just a couple of years out of film school.
And I have to say, it made a huge impact on me. This came out in 1989, so I would have been about 18 and 17 living in Montreal. And this movie kind of changed my worldview of what a mainstream Hollywood movie could be.
Good. That's when we were trying to shake it up a bit, even, back then, because there had been quite a run of teen movies, John Hughes and all those sorts of things, which we liked, but we wanted to kind of undercut them to a certain degree and reflect a darker teenage experience that I think many of us had.
So let's go a little bit backwards to, you said you were coming out of USC.
Yeah.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in San Francisco, and I worked actually in film when I was young, worked for Francis Coppola, and ended up at USC Film School, and I made a short there that got me an agent, and that basically led to doing Heathers.
And the short had a provocative title?
It did. It was called The Beaver Gets a Boner. It was written by a guy named Redbeard Simmons. That was his name. He was very funny and had a great sense of humor, and it was a very subversive movie for USC Film School at the time.
And it similarly kind of turned like the educational tropes of on their head, because he was a guy who owed drug money and he got a scholarship to college to pay off his drug debts.
Yeah, at USC Film School, where they, I think to this day, control the material that the students are allowed to make for their thesis projects, for their final films, they approve the scripts. It's a very difficult process. And Redbeard wrote a script that was essentially a parody of your classic USC student film, which is about a kid in a town who has aspirations, is stuck, doesn't know whether to take that scholarship or not take that scholarship and move on in their lives. And the professors at USC said, we only want to approve movies that are within the realm of experience of these young wannabe filmmakers. So every other USC student film was an insipid variation on that trope. And so Redbeard said, well, I'm going to write one about a kid who needs to get a scholarship to pay off his drug dealer. And we went from there. And thankfully, the faculty at USC was receptive to this. They got a kick out of it. They supported it, or many of them supported it. Some of them didn't. But we were able to make the film. And it caused a kind of a minor splash when it screened at the SC student screenings, because it was different in tone than anything else that had come out of SC, at least for a while.
It had a little punk rock spirit to it.
Yeah, and that was not, it just wasn't done at that school at that time.
Okay. So that started getting circulated around town, or did it get outside of the USC bubble?
Yeah, it did. I think they still do it today. They have industry screenings of the student films. And back then, because there was no internet really, or nothing to spread these kind of things around, an event was made in which the films were screened mostly for agents and young studio executives looking for talent. And when The Beaver Gets a Boner screened, it got a pretty good response. And I was approached by a whole bunch of agents, which was really fun and unexpected, and ended up signing with Bobby Thompson at William Morris, who was good at finding talent.
Wow. Okay. So it really did well, your short.
Yeah, it did well. It didn't really get me directly a ton of work right away, but it did lead really directly to Heather's, I guess, because Bobby became my agent. She showed the film to New World Pictures, which at the time was no longer Roger Corman's operation, but it was run by Bob Ramey and a couple other guys. And they had a young executive named Steve White, who'd been in Groundling and had a really good twisted sense of humor.
Okay.
For a moment, he was head of production there, and he saw The Beaver. And he said, "Oh, that's good. I'd like to work with this kid." And that led to me, I don't think I didn't have a deal there, but it led to me being able to pitch them ideas, and I did my first 2 movies for them.
Terrific. Okay. So, and now there's this script floating around town.
Yeah. So Dan Waters, the brilliant Daniel Waters, who really is an incredible writer and a great guy, was friends of mine through Larry Karaszewski, who was also my classmate at SC. And Larry and Dan had gone to high school together. Dan kind of hung out with the crowd that I was part of. I didn't know him very well, but I knew him. And the story had been that Dan was working in a video store and writing this opus for a couple of years called Heather's. And when he finished a draft, which was, I think, 250 pages long, he showed it to Larry. Larry showed it to his agent at ICM, who said, "Yeah, I don't think anybody's going to make this movie." Apparently, she didn't get it. So she didn't want to represent Dan. And I remember, I think it was Larry who called me and said, Dan Waters has this script. It's really great. He's looking for an agent. Do you think you could show it to Bobby Thompson? And I said, "Yeah, sure. Let me read it." And I read the script, and it was long. I mean, it was really funny and very twisted. It was Heather's, but it had even more episodes of mayhem in it. And I thought it was really great. And I showed it to Bobby, and she immediately flipped for it and chose to represent Dan. And Denise DeNovi, who was a young producer who I knew socially, was also a Bobby Thompson client. So she put us together, and Denise and I and Dan took it to New World after Bobby tried to get, mainstream A-list directors to direct the movie, but nobody bought it.
Okay, a couple of questions. One, so you guys were in the same scene. Where were you guys hanging out at the time? Like, what was the scene back then?
Well, there was a film school scene that was very counter to what USC Film School had been about. We all felt like we wanted to make really interesting films. We wanted to make independent movies. And USC had been geared very much as the mainstream, sort of gateway to mainstream Hollywood. They taught conventional techniques. They treated people really badly, saying, well, if you're going to work in the movie industry, you need to know how to deal with rejection, and nobody's going to give you any compliments, and nobody's going to give you any help. It was a kind of a miserable environment, but a very, very good filmmaking education. So Larry and a bunch of other guys lived in a house down at USC that I think they called it Club Real. And it was just a trashy old West Adams house, and everybody would hang out there. And there were a bunch of us who were good friends. It was a great class at school. I mean, Larry and Scott Alexander, his writing partner, they came out of that class. Jay Roach was in that class. Even independent filmmakers, Greg Araki was in our class.
Oh, wow.
We had a bunch of really creative, hardworking, twisted people going to school together.
And partying together.
Partying together, yeah, for sure. It was, I think I graduated in 1985. So maybe, 85, 86, somewhere in there. Those were days that were a little bit more fun than other days.
And Dan, the screenwriter.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about him? I had noticed he'd gone to McGill, which was my alma mater.
Yeah.
But what else can you say? I know he's kind of brilliant, eccentric. I know that he envisioned Kubrick as his first choice to direct Heathers.
Yeah.
So what else can you tell us about his personality?
Well, Dan is extremely funny. He has the razor sharp wit that is in that script is Dan Waters. If you talk to him, he's a constant source of amusement. Very bright guy, grew up in Indiana. And son of a college professor. Dan went to McGill in Montreal, and I think he studied English literature. He very interested in film. He's the one person I know who to this day sees literally every movie that makes it out into the world every year.
Those people amaze me.
Yeah, I know. I don't know I don't know what he does with the rest of his time. But, sometimes at the end of the year, I'll say, Did you see this film? He goes, well, yeah, I wasn't able to see that one, but he sees everything, and he's an odd guy, but he's a very funny, accessible. He's a great guy. We're still very good friends, and he didn't go to USC Film School. I can't remember where he was living exactly. He was around, I knew him from all the people that we hung out with.
And he did the Tarantino thing before Tarantino. He worked at a video store and then made it in Hollywood.
Yes, he did. He's the pre-Tarantino. And I've always wondered, I don't think he knows Quentin. Maybe he's met him. I've always wondered what the feeling is, between the two of them. Dan's an original. He doesn't drive. He's lived in LA all this time. He doesn't drive a car. So if you see him, he's either going to take public transportation or these days an Uber, or you go pick him up.
Okay, I think I need to track this guy down.
Oh, yeah, you need to track him down. He's a great interview because, as is evidenced in his scripts, he's great with one-liners. He'll give you plenty of quotes and all that sort of thing. I'm not like Dan in that way.
All right. So I know that you obviously had to whittle it down to something more approaching, a traditional film and length.
Yeah.
So was that difficult to get him to let you do that?
No, he's remarkably flexible for a writer who has as much vision as he has. Mm-hmm. He never was, well, he wasn't happy about it, but he didn't resist notes the way a lot of writers do, who might say, I wrote this brilliant script, I don't want to change a word. I'm sure Dan didn't want to change a word. I remember my first conversation with him about it was I probably only halfway got what the script was. I was reading it just to get it to an agent, and I just wanted to see what it was about. And I remember reading it as quickly as I could read a 250-page script. And I was pretty fresh out of film school, but I'd worked as a script reader for a while. And I said, Dan, nobody will read a script of this length. Or if they read it and if they love it, they're still never going to make it at this length, not a comedy. And he got that. And I never told him what to cut. That's the thing, is that he's pretty good about having some perspective on his own material. So I said, you got to figure out which of these strands of story are least important to you, and we'll cut it down. And I'm sure he took it down to about maybe 140 pages, maybe 120 pages. I can't remember, but he brought it down to a manageable length. I'm pretty sure that, not positive, but I'm pretty sure that what Bobby Thompson read was a shorter version than the full length, the very full length one.
Now it would be a 6-part, streaming series. And he could have his whole vision laid out there. But so let's talk a bit about what it is about. You mentioned John Hughes before, which I think now with time has been accepted as one of our greatest filmmakers. But maybe then, he was the mainstream, and people were getting a little tired of the glut of Hughes teen movies coming out.
Yeah, it's complicated because John Hughes was not really a mainstream guy. He came out of National Lampoon. Right. His humor was very irreverent. Some of the best stuff that he did that myself and all my friends liked were things that he did for the Lampoon, or that were way out there. Right. So, and I had a kind of peripheral involvement with that group because when I worked for Coppola, I worked on The Outsiders.
Oh, no
and
kidding.
Was around when had a very junior job, but I was around when all those young actors were coming in to audition. I was around for the shooting of the movie. There was a young woman named Michelle Manning who got very involved inside of that generation of teen films. I don't know if she worked directly with John. I think she might have. In fact, I'm pretty sure she did, but she also worked with Sean Daniel at Universal, who was involved in making those early John Hughes movies. So I always felt like, it's not that I was part of that crowd by any means, but I watched it come together and was supportive, But at the same time, I always thought John Hughes's high school movies were strangely kind of nostalgic and sweet about high school, which is one of the reasons why people love them. But in spite of his own dark humor, those movies did not go that far. They kind of danced around like serious issues, and the language was mostly pretty clean. So what distinguished what Dan was doing is he had characters that were killing each other. And he had people saying things that were pretty outrageous, but not out of line with how teenagers talk and think, even if he coined language that was maybe a little better than the way they actually phrase things.
Yeah, I would go so far as to say that Heather's created a new genre, which is these high school films as sort of almost like battle movies.
Yeah.
And you certainly would never have a Mean Girls without Heather's, and I don't even know if you'd have Clueless without Heather's. It got into the sort of more complicated warfare between teens. Not that Hughes did not explore it, but like you said, I think ultimately he had a very glossy vision of what teenagers, what their character was. Yeah. And Heather's said, no, actually, they're pretty horrible people.
Right. They do really bad things to each other. And the social interactions are quite often mean-spirited and destructive and, tremendously awful. Whereas, John Hughes, it was like the conflicts were a little bit easier to swallow. And Hughes wrote a lot of very amusing characters, like Ferris Bueller, that sort of thing. Very different than Heather's. I mean, I don't think when we were making Heather's, we were well aware of John Hughes movies, but we didn't think that we were answering them or responding to them or doing anything particular in relation to those films. We just thought they didn't show the kind of high school that we wanted to show in our movie.
Right. And then, of course, the other thing is that it's suicide is a big running theme of the film, and if it's even possible, it somehow makes suicide funny.
Right? Yeah. I mean, we got in a lot of trouble from a lot of people. People said, you can't make a comedy about teenage suicide, and we would say we didn't make a comedy about teenage suicide. We made a comedy about the issues surrounding suicide and the response of parents and teachers and the world to the ways in which kids deal with their issues. So,
and the kind of deifying or saintliness of the suicide victim and how everyone, wraps themselves around that.
Yeah.
And I know that Winona Ryder said that there was a very similar situation that happened at her high school, right? As the script kind of landed in her lap, that made her realize, I have to make this film.
Yeah, yeah. Winona really connected to the material. She was only 16 at the time, and so she was in high school, and she got it, and she was just gung ho to make the film. Once she read the script, she really got it.
So let's talk about the casting. So New World gives you how much money to make this film?
Well, I think by the time we finished, we spent close to $3 million, which was, pretty decent for a small non-studio film at the time. I don't know if they were planning on giving us quite that much. They wanted to keep it very limited. The economics of the industry at that moment were driven a lot by the growth in the home video business. So a company like New World wanted to build up a library that they then could sell as home video cassettes, and this was just exploding at that time. So a lot of movies got made just because they needed the product to put in the video stores. And then the companies that made it could make a lot of money off of those things. So there was just a moment where there were slightly less stringent demands on the content from the people who were financing these kind of movies.
Did you get the sense they believed in this project, or really was it just like feeding a content pipeline kind of thing?
I think at the highest levels of the company, they were feeding the pipeline, and then they were happy if it was good, but if it wasn't that good but could feed the pipeline well, they were good with that. I don't think that the amount of money that we had to make that movie really reflected any particular interest in the script itself. Steve White, as I said, he really got the humor of the script, and he really wanted to make the movie. He made us change some things, which we were not happy about, but there wasn't anybody else who was willing to make the movie with the kind of enthusiasm that he had. And his bosses, I think they gave him he was allowed to green light under a certain budget. I don't know what it was. I don't know exactly what the restrictions were, but he basically said, if you can make this for the amount that I can green light, you're fine.
And this is the guy from the Groundlings.
Yeah.
So of course he loved the script, and he was like, this is one long dark sketch.
Yes. Yeah.
Go for it.
He did.
But you went above and beyond. I mean, in terms of the way the film looks and having it streams for Amazon Prime subscribers for free, so you should check it out. It looks amazing. It's a beautifully shot film. I know that some of your camera operators went on to work with Spielberg, and it really is a handsome film.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you. It was, my feeling had been, because I'd kind of come up working around a lot of good filmmakers and watching them work. I was a junior guy. I didn't really have anything to do with the filmmaking, but I would watch it. And I always felt like when you see a conventional comedy, it's brightly lit. It's not shot in an interesting way. The camera's at a very standard level. The camera doesn't move much. There's not much stylistically in your conventional Hollywood comedies there's not much opportunity taken to use cinematic tools to tell your story. And I felt like, well, why not? Stanley Kubrick's movies are really funny, the comedies that he did, and they're stylish. And they're stylish in a way that works for the material, doesn't take away from the material, doesn't overwhelm the material. So for me at that time, I thought, really what I want to do is make a great looking movie that functions as good cinema and is as funny as it would be if I just shot it like a John Hughes movie, And Mitch Dubin, who was the camera operator, he worked at Zoetrope with me. He was a junior camera guy, and he'd gone to New York and worked as an operator, eventually first assistant and then an operator for Ed Lachman, who's a great cinematographer. Francis Kenny, who was the DP on Heathers, had been Ed Lachman's operator before Mitch. They were friends. I met Francis through Mitch. And I called Mitch up and I said, hey, I've got a movie. Can you believe it? I'm directing a movie. I want you to work on it. And I think he was still in New York at the time, but he still had a place in California. He could come out. And I said, I need a DP. Who do you like to work with? He said, Francis is really good. And I said, great. So I met Francis Kenny. I hired him. I hired Mitch. John Huttman, who was a production designer, was brilliant. He went on to he's had a great career. he was young. Couldn't have been 25, you know, had worked for some really good production designers. And we felt like we could make a good movie, you know, if we were judicious and economical and focused on trying to make it look good. And the material itself, I think it really lent itself to style, you know, I personally don't like things that are over stylized just for the sake of style, unless they're really, really good and really fun to watch. And generally speaking, they don't have material that is as strong verbally, you know, as what Dan wrote.
Well, I would say that maybe USC was part of what gave you all these great tools and instincts as to who to hire.
Probably. Yeah.
You have to hand it to them.
Yes. Yeah. No, I mean, that's true. That it was funny when I chose to go to USC, part of my thinking was, I want to know how to make real, you know, classic Hollywood style movies. I want to have that in my toolbox. It doesn't mean I want to make those movies. And in fact, in my career since then, the movies that I've made and television shows I've worked on that embarrass me the most are the ones that are the most conventional, because I actually don't like it that much, but I learned how to do it, you know. So there was a sense of knowing how to use the tools well and USC always provided a very strong visual storytelling education. So for me, that was important. It was good, but I've always been a photographer. I've always been interested in these sorts of things. I feel like cinema is very visual, and yes, it's also verbal, and television is maybe more verbal. It's sometimes a point of conflict for me when, you know, I'm not really into just doing talking heads. But in this case, Dan really conceived of a movie that had all sorts of great visuals built into the script. So once again, I'm gonna nod to Dan for a lot of that.
Now, Winona Ryder, when she was cast in the film, she had already done Beetlejuice, or was she filming Beetlejuice? Or
she had just finished filming Beetlejuice. The thing that happened was we were looking to cast the film, and obviously the casting of Veronica was going to be super crucial. And Dan had Jennifer Connelly in mind when he wrote the script, and and I loved Jennifer Connelly. I thought she was fantastic.
She would have slayed it too. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, she's great. And so we said, all right, well, what do we do? How do we get Jennifer Connelly? And we made an inquiry to her agents and her parents, because she was also young, and we got rejected pretty quickly. So we none of us had any connections there. There was nothing we could do. So we were turned down on that front. New World did not say you have to cast a movie star, but they did say we would prefer that you cast somebody that people have heard of. And they went to Justine Bateman, interestingly, because Steve White knew her dad, I think, and felt like he wanted to take it to her. And we said, fine. You know, she felt like she could be good. She'd done some other interesting films at the time. Wasn't our first choice necessarily, but we were willing to go there because we thought she would do the job and maybe surprise us and be incredibly great. She turned us down. So, we're like, okay, who else? I had seen, I'd seen a movie called Square Dance, I think it was. And I thought Winona had a small part. And I had actually written a script with a friend of mine that was about a young girl who worked as a maid in a motel. And when I saw the movie Square Dance, I said, that girl could be the lead in this other script that I was writing. So I took note of her name, and I brought it up. And Dan Waters, who back then also saw every single movie that was ever made in any given year, knew all her work. And he said, oh, yeah, she's really good. She's really good. And I brought her up, but we were told she didn't mean anything to New World. I don't think they knew who she was. Then Bobby Thompson, our agent, showed it to Michael McDowell, who was a writer client of hers, and Michael was co-writer of Beetlejuice. And he, I think he's no longer with us, but he was a very, very funny, dark-humored fellow. And he read the script and flipped and said, Winona Ryder would be perfect for this. We're making Beetlejuice now. Can I show it to her? And Bobby said, Michael wants to show it to this girl, Winona Ryder. I said, yeah, please. He showed it to her on the set of Beetlejuice. She read it. she said, I have to do this movie. I need to do this movie. We got word of that through Michael. We went out to her agent, who was Andrea Eastman at ICM, very good agent and represented a lot of, Winona was, I think at that point, seen within the industry as an up-and-comer. Andrea was very protective and said, there's no fucking way you're going to do this little, dark teen movie made by nobodies for New World Pictures when I've just got you on a Warner Brothers film. And Winona said, no, I'm going to do this movie. And she overruled her agent, who really didn't want her to do it, apparently. And she came in and she met with us, and I was very positively inclined anyway. When she walked in the door, it was like, oh my God, this girl is going to be, she's better than anybody else we've even thought about for the role.
She tells a story that agent got on her hands and knees and begged her not to do the film.
Yeah, that may be the case. So she did tell us at the time that her agent just really, really thought it was a terrible career move.
Right.
I can't remember if I knew her agent a little bit and thought she was great. I may have had a conversation with her, maybe not. I probably had conversations with her later. But she was outspokenly opposed to Winona doing the film.
Amazing. A teen suicide comedy, and her agent didn't want her to do it.
Yeah. How can you believe that? Yeah. How is that possible? Well, it's also, it was also New World Pictures, and It was a first-time director. And
we should say that New World, if you could just explain a bit what New World is.
Well, yeah, New World was Roger Corman's company. Right. He formed it in the 60s or late 50s or whatever to basically feed drive-ins and, in a chain of low-rent movie theaters. And he made very, very inexpensive classic films, up through the 60s that were great. And at some point in the late 70s, I think, or maybe early 80s, Roger had sold the New World Pictures name to some investors who were going to turn it into something similar, but something else. And he was no longer doing it. But in everybody's mind, New World Pictures meant Roger Corman.
Right.
And super low budget exploitation films made for 20 cents that looked terrible, but that, launched the careers of a whole bunch of really good filmmakers and actors.
Including Scorsese.
Yeah.
And isn't your former boss?
Yep.
Didn't he go through there?
Coppola made Dementia 13 for Roger Corman. Yeah, it was people would get out of film school and they go work for Roger, and he supported them, and he was really a mentor to a lot of people, but he gave them no money. He just said, okay, I got $50,000 and we have this set from this Gladiator movie that I made last week. You have a week. You can use the short ends of film from from other things we've shot, and I'll throw together a crew for you, make the film. And that was how they did it.
So we have Winona on the set halfway through Beetlejuice, reads the script. She's like, I got to do this next. And then she does your film. She gets her way. And, it's some of the visual, fancy in your film isn't totally out of step with Beetlejuice. It's certainly the dream sequence funeral is very Beetlejuicean kind of.
Yeah. Tim Burton and I were coming up at the same time. He was not an influence for me because I wasn't looking at his movies that way, but he was somebody, I liked his films. I think I remember seeing Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and I thought, yeah, that's pretty funny,
Right. And certainly to launch her career, I can't think of two better films. She's like a goth in the one. This one, she's popular, but still killing people and kind of goth at heart. And it seems like I would assume these are the two films that made her the superstar that she became.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because they really drew a lot of attention to her. And she's great in both films. And she was great in a lot of things that she did. And to this day, doing Stranger Things, I guess she's still out there.
She's still doing it, yeah. And, in rewatching Heather's, her performance is just next level. I mean, it's really very real, and you really feel for her in certain moments. And I think she kind of makes it work. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree completely. The thing is that Dan's dialogue is very stylized, and it's extremely clever, and it's great, but it's also not exactly the way people talk, but It's not dissimilar to how teenagers talk. And I felt that the best way to make that work was to play it as real as possible, that it was going to be plenty funny. There was never any reason to emphasize the humor or to try to make, to burlesque it or make it something that, where you're winking at the camera and I didn't want it to be arch. The dialogue could be done that way. And I'm sure in the hands of other filmmakers, it might have been done that way, but that's not what I thought was right for it. And Dan agreed with me. And so with Winona, what I loved about her is that she played it the way you would play a dramatic role, with full commitment, full emotional commitment. And the humor just sort of flowed from what she did and how she did it. And that was great. She got the joke, which was kind of great. She was a very, very bright 16-year-old. She understood where Dan was coming from. She understood what I wanted tonally, and she was on board for that. Some of the other actors, I don't think they were as self-aware nor as artistically aware as she was. And then it was a matter of just sort of, we'll herd them in this direction. We'll make sure they do it this way. But she really got it. She was a good collaborator in that regard.
Dear Diary, Heather told me she teaches people real life. She said, real life sucks losers dry. If you want to fuck with the Eagles, you have to learn to fly. I said, so, you teach people how to spread their wings and fly? She said yes. I said, you're beautiful. God, come on, Veronica. What is your damage, Heather?
Well, let's talk about one of her co-stars, Shannon Doherty, plays one of the Heathers.
Yeah.
Who, of course, goes on to great success in Beverly Hills 90210, which I would call the thing that Heathers is parodying, right?
Yeah. Just as a quick aside, at one point when the brand new Fox television network was being put together, I got a call from Denise and Dan saying, Fox is making a new television network and somebody thinks we should go pitch Heathers as a TV series.
Right.
And I said, oh, I don't know what that means. And Dan wrote some sort of outline, and we made a proposal for a series, and we went in and pitched it in the first weeks of the Fox network, and they turned us down to make 90210.
Funny. And then as another aside, UPN, the Paramount network, which no longer exists, did make a Heathers show right before the pandemic, and that was so controversial that never made it to air. I hear they pulled it because they felt it was too hot to show.
Yeah, that's what I heard too. I never saw it. I probably should track it down and take a look. Dan saw it. He said he said they changed a lot of stuff to make it more modern. Did you see it? Have you seen it?
No, I've just heard things like, for example, the Heathers are now gay men now,
right.
Or gay people, and I think in the current Twitter landscape where it's all about identity politics, people didn't like the idea that a gay character could be a bad person, and it became very black or white, and it lost. I think it was a product of its time, and in the current era, something like Heathers couldn't exist.
Right. There's no way it could exist right now. But
it probably couldn't exist then either, but you just went ahead and did it.
That's pretty much true. People say to me all the time, they go, oh, do you think could you make Heathers now? I go, we couldn't make Heathers then. We right. got it made, but it's not like, right. oh, this is easy. We didn't waltz in and say, read this funny script, let's make this film. It was, we were lucky enough to find the right people in the right place at the right time to sort of be able to say yes. And we squeezed it through. You know?
And that's, so many of my favorite movies and so many successes and, are those lightning in a bottle moments. And that's sort of what this podcast is about, the times it does happen.
Yeah, it's so rare. I mean, it's funny. I've developed plenty of things in the intervening years that were really good, that would have made great films, but they were too dark or I couldn't get the right actor. And, when you miss your opportunity to make one of these things, chances are it goes away forever. Sometimes it goes away for a while and comes back, but chances are once somebody has made the judgment that we're not going to make this, it's really hard to get people interested, especially if it's something that is, out of the ordinary.
So back to Shannon, I was watched one of the featurettes on one of the DVDs, and she said that she came out of the first screening crying.
Yes, yeah.
Because it wasn't the movie that she thought she was making during the filming. Do you remember that?
I do. the whole thing was kind of baffling to me. Shannon came in and auditioned, and the casting directors, Julie Seltzer and Sally Dennison, said to me right before she came into the room, they said, okay, this next girl, she's really good. We think you should take her seriously. She really, really, really wants to play Veronica. And I said, why are you telling me that? Veronica's cast. Mm-hmm. We have Winona. Does she know that? And they said, yes, she knows that, but she and her people want you to know that she really wants to play Veronica. I said, okay, good. Let's bring her in. She came in and she played Heather Duke. She might have read Heather Duke. She might have read Heather Chandler. I don't know. She read one of the parts. I thought she was terrific. I said, oh yeah, this girl's great. She's going to fit in this movie. I'd love to cast her. I obviously can't cast her as Veronica, so let's offer her Heather Duke. And she took the part.
I prayed for the death of Heather Chandler many times, and I felt bad every time I did it, but I kept doing it anyway. Now I know you understood everything. Praise Jesus. Hallelujah.
Shannon was even younger than Winona. I think she turned 16 when we made the film, and she had been on Our House and Little House in the Prairie. So maybe she went on to do a guest spot in House because she specialized in House. Anyway, she had a TV career doing these kind of wholesome family things. And I don't know what she thought she was getting into. She said she loved the script, and she was game to do everything that was on the page. She caused me a moderate amount of grief during the shooting. I think she thought of herself as more of a star than anybody else in the show because she'd done these TV series. And so, but I think she did a great performance. I was always really, really happy with what she did. Mm-hmm. And the only thing, what I really remember is that she was so used to doing television where she would hit her marks and say her lines and do everything as called on. I would say to her, I don't want that. I don't want the perfect performance. Just throw out all those things and let loose a little bit, which she never quite understood. She was young. She would look at me like, well, how can you tell me that what I just did was perfect, but it's too perfect? I'd say, just keep going, But it's true. She was very upset when she saw the film. I don't know why. I don't know if it's that she didn't get what the movie was, or she was unhappy because Winona did such a great job. Maybe she didn't like what she did. I don't know. I didn't have a whole lot of contact with Shannon afterwards, and she did eventually come around and speak positively about the movie. But when it was first released, I think if I remember right, and I don't think it made any difference to us, really, is that she just didn't really want to have anything to do with it, which is kind of funny.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the other star to emerge from it is Christian Slater, who makes a huge impact. I mean, who could ever forget his role in this? And just the greetings and salutations when, that's his opening line to her. And I remember used to do my imitation of him as Jack Nicholson doing greeting, but it really kind of just all fades because one is so much like Jack Nicholson than who is doing who at this point. Yeah. But tell me a bit about how you found Christian, and was it a hard part to cast, or how many guys did you look at?
Oh, it was a really hard part to cast. I mean, we did read a lot of guys. I think word got out that it was a good role, and so a lot of the young actors that were out there who weren't quite yet stars, but were good, came in to read. And years later, I heard from other actors I wasn't even aware of, who went on to have good careers, said, I came in and read for that. I was like, I don't remember.
Anyone iconic that we would be
well, Matthew Perry told me. He said, I wanted that role so badly, I came in and read. Brad Pitt showed up for this is, I've told the story a lot, people know this, but that we did a table read of the movie before it was cast, before it was fully green-lit. We did just a casual table read. And Brad Pitt came in and read JD because he was friends with a friend. And he gave a completely cold reading of the script. He hadn't read it before he showed up. He just sat down, read it around the table, and I have an audio cassette of that.
No kidding.
Yeah, which is funny. And he did a pretty good job for somebody who's just like walking into a room reading that particular script. A bunch of good actors came in and read, but none of them did anything that I thought was right for the role. It was strange. Either they were way like overacting it because it was kind of an overwrought part, but my point was, no, pull away from all that. Don't do it that way. And even in the auditions, working with actors, they had a hard time. The younger guys had a hard time finding that the way to play the character as a real person. The interesting thing about Christian is he did that sort of Jack Nicholson influenced read the first time he read for us. And I thought, well, that's strange. But at that point, I realized that the girls who came in to read for the female parts were pretty sophisticated for the most part. And it may be that, the cliche is that girls mature faster than boys.
And I will inject at this point that, to your credit, you wanted actual teens. You did not want actors in their 20s playing teens.
Right. Very important to me. This was a reaction also to the John Hughes movies where there were 25-year-olds playing teenagers. And yes, they looked young and nobody complained. But I thought there's something very particular about a real teenager. They are a child still, but they've got elements of an adult in them. You can tell the difference. When you look at a 16-year-old and you look at a 20-year-old, there is a difference. And I felt like this movie would be far more effective and much, much better if I could get real teenagers to play the part. So Winona was 16. It was fantastic. Shannon was 15. It was perfect. Christian, 19. He was still a teenager. Kim Walker, I think, was 18. And Lisanne Falk, who played Heather McNamara, was a little older. She was in her early 20s, but we really liked her, and her reading was great. So, but no, I was looking for teenagers. And that meant none of those John Hughes kind of actors, not that they would have done it. Those guys were all stars, but we didn't want that. I totally didn't want that. But a lot of actors came in and they really wanted the role. They saw that it was something to do, but their readings were terrible. I mean, I just thought they were terrible. And so we were scratching our heads going, what are we going to do? We had a pretty good read from Donovan Leitch, who was, a young actor, kind of building a career at the time. He was good. I remember there was another kid named Kevin Hardesty who ends up he's got one line in the film, but he was a total unknown, hadn't done anything. He gave a great reading, but we didn't think it was necessarily perfect. And Christian came in, and Christian's reading was really good. The Nicholson thing was a question. I also noticed that a lot of the young actors, they were imitating somebody. Unlike the girls who just played the roles, it felt like all the young male actors had to have some sort of model in mind, somebody that they were imitating, which was really annoying. But I talked to Christian about it, and I said, what is this Jack Nicholson sort of thing you're doing? He goes, well, two things, to his credit. One, he said, when he looked at all the actors out there who'd done really good jobs at dark comedy, he kept defaulting to Nicholson. So Nicholson was the only one who had done this sort of thing and pulled it off. And then he pointed out, which is true, his voice is just like Jack Nicholson's anyway.
This is how I talk.
This is how I talk. That's what he said. This is how I talk. And, I couldn't argue with that because that actually was how he talked. So, there were some times when I tried delicately to pull away from it if it felt like he was doing a Nicholson thing. But, I also said, let's go with this. He seems to really be doing a great job with the role, which I think he did.
And it's also really ballsy to be like, I'm doing Jack Nicholson and I dare you to object.
Exactly.
And it worked for him. It made him a star.
Yeah.
What are you talking about, huh? I mean, today was great. Chaos is great. Chaos is what killed the dinosaurs, darling. Face it, our way is the way. I mean, we scare people into not being assholes.
Our way is not our way.
Oh, yeah? Tell that to the judge, all right? Tell it to Kurt Kelly. Oh, God, Veronica.
I'm telling it to you.
I feel really certain that there was nobody else who came in to read that based on the readings that I saw, would have done anything anywhere near as good as what Christian did.
Yeah, he, like Winona, he seemed to get the material and get what the tone needed to be to sell it.
Yeah, he did. I mean, Winona she was very articulate and she was very self-aware, and we could talk about that sort of stuff. Christian, a little bit less so, but he had a very tough job. I mean, he had a lot of language to process to do that role. And he, it was tough. He did well. He did very well with it.
And they looked very good together, I would say.
They did. I remember we did a chemistry read when we were getting down to the wire, and we put them together in a room, and it was like, okay, we're good. This will work.
Thank you. That was my first game of strip croquet.
You're welcome. It's a lot more interesting than just flinging off your clothes and boning away on a neighbor's swing set.
I don't know, there's a lot to be said for throwing off your...
Ow! What a night. What a life.
So you have this incredible film, so many quotable moments in it. I mean, do you have a favorite line? I was taking notes, and all it was just quotes that I remembered from having seen it originally. And first of all, how very, I feel like that line ended up becoming things like "stop trying to make fetch happen" and all these quotable teen movie things. It was so great. And then bulimia is so 87. I remember being such a shocking line.
Grow up, Heather. Bulimia is so 87.
But of course, I had to quote it to all my friends.
Yeah.
"Fuck me gently with a chainsaw," I think is now part of the popular lexicon. I don't think we even question where that came from.
That was a favorite. That was reading the script. You were like, oh my God, we're going to have an actor actually say, "Fuck me gently with the chainsaw." And
Just Heather, why can't we talk to different kinds of people?
Fuck me gently with the chainsaw. Do I look like Mother Teresa?
personally, when Shannon says, "Why are you pulling my dick, Veronica?" I don't know, because she delivered it without any. There was no affectation to it. It was like, that's just what she was saying. I thought that it just cracked me up.
Veronica, why are you pulling my dick?
Also, I love my dead gay son. The way that's delivered is really pretty great.
My son's a homosexual, and I love him. I love my dead gay son.
And there were things that never made it into the movie. I had a conversation with Dan once, and I made a reference to Stained with Loserness. and we looked at each other. I said, did we cut that out? And there was this whole thing about being stained with loserness, which I thought was a great phrase. Right. And I think it never made the movie. I don't think it's there. And there were other things in the very long version. I think that one of the characters kept saying, "That's so turbo," which for the late 80s was perfect, but that never made it into the film.
Again, like now with all like kind of TikTok language and like Gen Z language, it's very similar to me. I don't know, they whatever they say, and I'm sure I'm not going to sound very cool right now, but flex or whatever the new term is that everyone's saying is very similar, I feel, to the language, the way you captured language in this film.
Yeah.
I was going to ask also about, you brought up my dead gay son scene. Now, this film, as far as I'm understand it, was one of the first to really sort of satirize homophobia in a smart way. Most of these comedies were saying fag and faggot, and that was the punchline.
Right.
This was very different. Could you talk about that at all?
Well, we felt that this that kind of accepted homophobia was really offensive, and that it was a great touch for JD's character to target that. It just made the jocks even worse than they already were. And the irony of him choosing to kind of plant a fake homosexual relationship there, when in fact all that bro-y kind of jock interaction was repressed homosexuality anyway.
Totally.
And
they plant certain things on them to make them seem like a couple, which I thought is so funny.
It's very funny. That would probably be offensive now, I guess, but at the time, actually, gays thought the movie was great. You know, there was the response from the homosexual community, whatever that was very positive because they got the joke and thought it was, funny the way we satirized homophobia. I don't know today, people they're so afraid to step on any of these things and to offend anybody. You can't do this kind of humor now.
Right. But very, very ahead of its time. And then the other thing that occurred to me in rewatching it was gun violence and general violence. It starts with Christian's character pulling a gun on the two jocks and scaring them with blanks. And then, the climax is with potential blowing up of the whole school. Now, this all happened pre-Columbine.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering if you have thoughts about where violence has gone in school.
Well, yeah, I think it's awful. I mean, and I remember the day after Columbine, I got a call from the New York Times. Did I want to comment? They left a message.
That's a heart-sinking moment.
And I was just horrified because the thought that one of the first places they might turn to at that point was to me for a movie that I'd made many years before that, which, as far as I knew, had no direct influence on the Columbine guys. I don't know, but that was horrifying. That it is horrifying. Violence in schools is horrifying. We were not promoting violence in schools by any means.
No, but in a way you were predicting it. There's a nihilism here.
Yes, there was a nihilism there in the attitude of JD, who seems very similar to a lot of people that decide to just be completely destructive in their final moments.
Even in his look, doesn't he wear a black raincoat?
He does. He wears a black duster. But I mean, I know that with Columbine, I panicked when I heard about this because I would have felt, terrible thinking that anything in this movie actually inspired anybody to violence. And in fact, the Columbine guys, I was told at the time, well, no, they wore black duster coats they were imitating Jim Carroll, but anyway, this whole idea that I certainly, the question of the relationship between violence in movies and violence in real life is extremely complicated. And I've always fallen in on the side of there's nobody who actually commits a violent act, really kills somebody just because they saw something in a movie. That's what I've always felt. Now I don't even know anymore because the cumulative effect of seeing a lot of violence that desensitizes cannot be good, So I think I've been very careful in more recent years in using violence in movies, although I did a lot of True Blood, which was very violent, but it was a different kind of violence.
Right. It was fangs and things. It's not explosives.
Yeah. I mean, the sad fact is that human beings are predatory and they kill each other and anything horrible that one person can do to another, they will do. And that's super depressing. But it's also a reality. So when you make movies that depict violence, you do have to ask yourself the question, are you glorifying it in any way that might lead some confused person to take it as an invitation to commit actual violence? I generally feel like, no, it's vicarious. If you watch something on screen, it allows you to experience some of those violent fantasies and probably keeps you from doing it, but God knows. I mean, that's the thing is that today you couldn't make Heathers because there has been so much really horrifying violence done in schools.
Right.
And that was not the case then.
Right.
And it was many years before that became the case.
Right.
So, it was complicated. It's complicated. But one of the things that, the one issue we had with Steve White at New World is that he made us change the ending, because in the original ending, the JD blew up the school,
right, and
there was a prom in heaven, and we liked that. We thought that was a good end because it was not in any way a cop out. It didn't say everything's going to be fine; it said everything's not going to be fine, and that Dan and I both felt that was a good message to put out there. And Steve White said to us, he said, look, I'm not going to make a movie that satirizes the response to teen suicide and deals with all these heavy, complicated issues, and then has basically the two main characters kill themselves. He said, you make that movie and then one person kills themselves and it's on you. And I said, I don't agree with that, but at the same time, I don't want anybody to kill themselves because of what they see in a movie that I've made. And he wasn't going to be convinced of anything anyway, so we changed the ending. But now, in retrospect, you say, did that movie feed anybody's violent tendencies? Did it lead to any school violence? I certainly hope not, because, we were not in any way endorsing that.
And so, of course, in the changed ending, you have Christian's character detonating himself and causing. You have Winona on the school steps, and that iconic look with the soot all over her face, and then this long ash, the longest ash since The Shining, I think, to hit the silver screen, and just a great moment there. And then kind of a sweet ending with Martha dump truck riding her little scooter around Winona.
Yeah. I'm good with that ending. It's not as dark as what Dan originally wrote and what we were originally planning on shooting, but
and she's the new queen bee, and I don't know, it kind of wraps it up in a good way, better than
It's not a cop-out ending. It's just not as dark as what we originally went for.
And so the movie comes out, and what's the reception? What are people saying?
Well, it was mostly good. We got a lot of good reviews. I can quote all the bad reviews. I can't quote any of the good ones. This is what happens when you make something that goes out in the world.
Did Roger Ebert give it a bad review?
He gave it a tepid bad review. Pauline Kael gave it a pretty much, I don't see what the fuss is all about kind of review.
Really? I would think she would get it.
Yeah, you would think and you would hope. Elvis Mitchell hated it. Wrote the meanest review of all time for the LA Weekly. Sheila Benson, who was the lead critic for the LA Times, hated it. But
I love that you remember all, and you're calling them all out.
Well, I'm not calling. I can call them out.
Great.
I respect their reviewers. They should say what they think.
They're all wrong.
Yeah. I thought they were wrong at the time, but at the same time, that's what their job is. And so. But it is really funny. I learned the hard way with my first film. Thankfully, I had a lot of good reviews to point to, but I realized that if you make this stuff, you want people to like it. Even if you're doing something that is deliberately intended to incite people, you want them to like it. And if they don't, you go, shit, I'll never get those words out of my head that I read, talking about how bad my movie was.
But people did like it mostly, and then I know I saw it in the theater. I don't remember which theater, but I know I saw it in the theater and was blown away. And then, of course, it had a whole second life as the studio had hoped on DVD.
Yeah, New World went out of business basically in the weeks that we were opening in theaters. So the movie was finished and it played at the Sundance Festival, which was not this, it was early days of the Sundance Festival. It was the same year that Soderbergh's Sex, Lies, and Videotapes was there. So it was one of the very first years.
It was in competition, or how was it involved in
No, it was just screening. Yeah, there was a guy named Tony Safford who programmed the festival, and great guy because he loved the movie. He loved the film. And I do remember it was a very interesting experience to go to Sundance because I was really excited. I thought, oh my God, I made this movie that I thought would be viewed as some sort of teen exploitation film for New World Pictures, and it's going to this film festival. And when I showed up at the festival and checked in at the desk, the guy said, "Oh, yeah, you made that film." I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "A lot of people are really pissed off with you." And I said, "What? What did I do?" And he said, "Well, Tony Safford likes the movie, and he puts you in good theaters and good screening times. And a lot of people are really pissed off." So the response at Sundance was pretty good. But there were a lot of people, and I knew people because I'd been around a little bit. I was young, but I'd worked for Coppola. I'd worked around a bit. I remember a lot of people at the festival were angry. They said, this doesn't belong in Sundance. Sundance is to celebrate independent filmmaking. You made a commercial film. You made a teen movie.
Too commercial.
It's too commercial.
You can't win.
Yeah, I was like, no, come on, you guys. This thing is, this is meant to be very subversive. And but we did get some good response, and it was great that it played there. I was extremely happy about that. But I did get a lot of sideways glances and a lot of nasty stuff from people that I vaguely knew.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was an interesting experience as well. The critics generally liked the movie quite a bit when it came out. I'm sure in today's world it would get a, Metacritic score or, Rotten Tomatoes score that would be reasonably good. But there were people who didn't like it. And the weekend we were released, New World had basically gone out of business. And we were the last movie that they released.
Wow.
And I remember going to the head of distribution, he worked in that exploitation arena. He tried so hard to get us to change the title. He said, you can't release a movie called Heathers. And then they released it overseas as Lethal Attraction, a combination of Lethal Weapon and Fatal Attraction. And I said to him, you can't do this. You can't release this movie as Lethal Attraction.
Right.
He said, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. You don't know anything about releasing movies overseas. Get out of my office. and so I went to him and I said, you got this movie. It's got all these great reviews. There's no ad in the New York Times or the LA Times, which in those days, people still read newspapers. I said, you're not supporting this film. And he goes, oh, don't be ridiculous. Of course there's an ad. And I said, show it to me. And I handed him the New York Times and the LA Times, and he pretended to open it up. And he went, oh, gee, you're right. I guess somebody must have made a mistake, so basically it got very little support in the theaters, but it played in limited release in the big cities and did good business. The theaters were packed for a few weeks.
And then it became a word of mouth hit cult hit on video and DVD.
Yeah. I think a lot of people have seen it.
And then you went on to some classic TV. I could do other episodes about the TV you've done, including Larry Sanders Show, and you did The Comeback, one of my favorite shows.
Yeah, that was a good one.
You've done some fantastic TV work. But your first thing after you did Heathers, do you want to talk about it? We don't have to go deeply into it, but it is a moment of Hollywood history as well.
I'm assuming you're talking about Hudson Hawk?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, because I did do another movie in between called Meet the Applegates, which was another that was even conceived before Heathers, and it's a very odd movie about giant insects from Brazil coming to the United States.
Oh, wow.
It's an odd one. I don't think you can see it anywhere.
Oh, wow. That sounds good, though.
But yeah, it has, Redbeard Simmons wrote it with me. And
good old Redbeard.
Yeah.
Got back together.
Yeah, we were working together. So anyway, Hudson Hawk was an experience. It was an interesting Hollywood experience, that's for sure.
Yeah. You had, and wasn't it also written by...
Well, yes, it was written by Dan Waters. The movie, when I got involved with it, by the way, Joel Silver, who produced all these big blockbuster hits, had seen Heathers, and I guess Bruce Willis had seen Heathers, and they both said, we got to work with these guys who did that.
Amazing.
Yeah, so Dan did rewrites on Demolition Man. It did some very good stuff on Demolition Man, actually, and he wrote Ford Fairlane, the Andrew Dice Clay movie,
right.
And Dan also did Batman Returns with Tim.
Classic.
Yes, but I was called in by Joel to look at this script for Hudson Hawk, which was written by Steve D'Souza. It was an extremely well-written kind of action-adventure comedy that I thought was fine, but not really what I wanted to do. And I said, well, I'll do this if I can turn the tables on this kind of genre and make a much more unusual version of this. And I'd like to bring Dan Waters in to do a revision. And Joel and Bruce were fine. That's great. And we did that. And that was a huge mistake because the movie was, generally, it was very badly received. It was ridiculed. It was given terrible reviews. And in spite of the fact that I think there's a lot of good stuff in that film.
Right.
And it has now kind of a cult following.
Right. As they always do.
As they do. But, you certainly don't want to have a cult following because it's so bad that it's good.
Right.
I like those movies, but I didn't really want to make one. And I always wonder to what degree even the cult following for that is based on that. However, I've seen the movie recently. It screens every once in a while, and Dan and I went and spoke at a screening, and that movie's way ahead of its time, I'll tell you that, in terms of the humor and the approach to the action genre and all that. So
there you go. It's time to give Hudson Hawk another look.
Yeah, every once in a while, somebody sees it and writes one of those reviews that says, this isn't anywhere near as bad as we thought it was.
Right. And I'll just leave you with one question. Have you seen Bodies, Bodies, Bodies?
Not yet. I plan to see it.
It has, I don't know, a certain essence that it reminded me of Heathers in that it's mocking current teen trends, but in a very subversive way. And I really enjoyed it. I think it's going to go on as a movie that's, I don't know if about a classic, but at least a cult classic.
Oh, yeah, good. I've read about it. I've seen that it's out there. I keep saying that's a movie I really want to see. Has it opened yet? Is it available?
It's been around for a while and actually became, the subject kind of a controversy because a woman in the New York Times gave it a very bad review and talked about how it's an advertisement for cleavage, which it absolutely is not. It was a very weird way to attack it. And then that became a back and forth with one of the stars. So that kind of blew up Twitter for a few days, but but she got it wrong. She definitely got it wrong. I think it's a really great film. So I would encourage people to see it if they haven't seen Bodies, Bodies, Bodies yet. Well, Michael, this has been unbelievably exciting. Thank you so much. I love Heathers. It is definitely a classic. If anyone out there has not seen it, go on Amazon right now and watch Heathers. You'll love it. A real pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, that was highly entertaining. One of the favorite films of my youth to really get behind the scenes and look under the hood of Heathers. If you've never seen it or it's been a while, I encourage you to go check it out. It's streaming for free to Amazon Prime subscribers, and I believe it's also on the Roku channel. So go pop some popcorn and watch Heathers. Now, next week, we're doing something very different. We're not doing a film or TV show. We're doing a book series. That's right, a book series. Which book series? Choose Your Own Adventure. These were book series that really captivated me as a kid, and they kind of, in many ways, anticipated a lot of stuff in terms of interactive narratives that you see in video games and on the Netflix one-time experiment Bandersnatch, which I thought was a lot of fun, and it basically follows the same format as Choose Your Own Adventure. So if titles like The Cave of Time or Who Killed Harlow Thrombey mean anything to you, I think you'll really enjoy next week's episode with the creator of Choose Your Own Adventure, Edward Packard. That's right. He's 92, and he came and joined us for an amazing episode. So your homework this week, read a Choose Your Own Adventure book or watch Bandersnatch, and we'll see you right here, same place, same time. And until then, we'll see you in Hollywood.